Is this a move that you think helps the league when it comes to the Rooney Rule going forward?
Yeah, I give the league credit for this taking this measure because back in early February when Brian Flores' lawsuit dropped and everybody is kind of weighing in on it, I think a lot of the pessimism was this needs to change, but I'm not necessarily sure how we should do it, and I think minority coaches have that opinion. I think us in the media looking at it from the outside kind of had that opinion, and good on whoever came up with this wrinkle to the role with a minority offensive assistant, because I do think that was one of the offshoots of why the hiring practices have not been producing the types of results that would make you believe in diversity in the NFL. So from that standpoint, I know Mike Tomlin has spoken about this before, that people don't realize he played wide receiver in college, but I think somebody told him early on in his career, or maybe he just decided on his own, that people who look like him generally rise up the ladder if they have a defensive background. So that's kind of what he did, and then worked under one of the best known defensive background head coaches in Tony Dungy. So yeah, I think this is a good move. It's one of those things where the Steelers are already kind of ahead of the curve on this. They just hired another minority to work on the offensive side of the ball, and assistant offensive line coach Isaac Williams, and he even comes from an HBCU. So I don't really see the downside in implementing this, and maybe it's one of those things where incrementally over time it does make a difference, even at the highest level when you talk about head coaches.
Maybe I'm naive here, and I'm not expecting you to know the answer to this question, but I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, are there any NFL teams that don't have a minority offensive assistant? I mean, these coaching staffs are huge, and like you mentioned, I mean, a lot of coaching staffs are made up of former players. The league has, for years now, been about 70+% minority based. I would imagine that probably every team already has one offensive assistant coach that would fall under that category, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I haven't looked at all 32. I do think that a lot of staffs are bigger than what the Steelers have, and yeah, you have all these assistant wide receivers coach, assistant running backs coach
Right.
on a lot of these teams. But yeah, it seems like this is going to be a little bit more of a targeted position for teams to kind of expand the staff they already have, and that's where this stipend being paid at least in part by the league, or a pot that is put in place by the league will kind of come in. So yeah, I think that's a good thing, and again, nobody has a great answer, but I think people like Mike Tomlin and people like Brian Flores, what they want to do is um, don't just talk about it, try to come up with solutions, and at least this is something that is sort of solution based and not quite as drastic as what they came up with a year or two ago with incentivizing other teams hiring minorities, or excuse me, if you have a minority coach or executive hired, it reflects well on you, and you get the compensatory draft picks. Obviously, that was kind of controversial when it happened. This is a little less groundbreaking, but again, nonetheless, at least somebody there in the league office is trying to do some good here and make some change in what's become just a never-ending issue for the league.
Talking with Brian Batko of the Post Gazette, talking some Steelers right now. When should we expect, or I mean, is this coming anytime soon? Some sort of indication on who the Steelers are going to settle on for their next GM. It seems like they've interviewed a ton of people. It seems like those interviews took place weeks ago, some of them, and still there's been no resolution. Are they just firmly waiting now until after the draft to announce who this is going to be to replace Kevin Colbert? Or could we potentially get an idea on who that might be before that happens, especially if it's an internal option like Omar Khan or Brandon Hunt?
Yeah, you never know if something's going to leak, and I do still tend to think that one of those two guys that you just mentioned is going to get the job if it's not some sort of hybrid role where both of them get promoted and kind of do Kevin Colbert's job by committee, so to speak. But I don't think there will be anything official until after the draft. I think the Steelers brass has been pretty consistent in saying that, and that would line up timing-wise with calling the shots should have a chance to have more say-so in this draft. But again, to go back to my original point here on the topic, I do still think that the person that succeeds Kevin Colbert will be somebody in-house, and thus it won't necessarily matter that they weren't in place before this draft because they'll already have been, a part of the entire process. Maybe I'll be wrong, but I'd be surprised if it's ultimately an outside candidate who gets that top job. It wouldn't be as shocking if they bring somebody in from another organization to be, say, the number 2 or number 3. But just the Steelers' way and knowing how they've done things for so long, I think they'll keep it. I think they'll keep it in the family to replace Kevin Colbert.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're going to promote from within, which is maybe the right move, but we'll see. Brian, the closer that we get to the draft, the more I start to doubt if they're going to take a quarterback, mainly because I think the top guys are going to come off the board a lot sooner than the Steelers get to pick. But it seems like the Steelers have at least telegraphed, in a way, the fact that they really want to take a quarterback. I mean, every time they get asked about it, it just seems like they're really eyeing in on quarterbacks this year. Has that surprised you at all, the way that they've been so open about their desires? Or could some of that just be smoke and mirrors and games that they're playing right now with the media?
It could be, but no, I think the events of last week with all the pro day sightings makes me think that they are more likely to spend that number 20 pick on a quarterback. And I'm not as sold that 2 or 3 of those guys are going to be off the board before number 20. I just think you could be in a situation here where every team is kind of hoping that another team will be the first to make the move, because maybe nobody's really sure what to make of the Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Kenny Pickett triumvirate, and who, with like a Desmond Ridder as kind of a dark horse fourth option there that some teams might even like the best. So I just think this draft is pretty well stocked with talent at other spots. It was long thought to be a little bit weaker than usual when it comes to quarterback, and maybe the Steelers realized that early on, or maybe it's just as simple as them sitting there and thinking, hey, one franchise quarterback out the door, why wait to try to find the next one? Let's go ahead and do as much homework on this year's crop as we can, and if we fall in love with one, great, we'll proceed accordingly. If not, we'll hope that one falls to us, and otherwise we'll pick somebody else on the defensive line or offensive line or whatever. But just over the years, you can read the tea leaves with where they're going and how they're moving, and that generally tends to align with who they pick, at least in the first round, and they've been moving toward quarterback really over the last week.
On the defensive side of the ball, Brian, what has been the holdup with the safety position? They're still looking for a strong safety. Obviously, they had one in Terrell Edmonds. I kind of expected by now that they would just kind of resign themselves to the fact that Terrell Edmonds is the best pick, but it hasn't happened yet. Any idea what's going on there? Are they still keeping their options open for a guy like Tyrann Mathieu, or maybe even going that way in the draft, or do you think that Edmonds will be the guy that eventually comes back in that position?
The longer this goes, I do think that we get an Edmonds-Pittsburgh reunion. My only idea here or sense of it is just that it was always going to be kind of an awkward negotiation because of them declining the fifth-year option. Terrell Edmonds is only human. I'm sure that had to tick him off at least a little bit. And if he really thinks he played better last year, and maybe there's this innate sense of I want to bet on myself now in free agency and get the most that I can, then perhaps that's why we haven't had something happen sooner. But the Steelers put themselves in a little bit of a bind by, I guess, not taking that chance on him. And you're almost at a point now where just logically you don't want to pay him more than that fifth-year option would have been, which I think was between like $7 and $8 million. So, that always kind of made it a little bit awkward, I'm sure, for this to – and that's why you generally don't see a team decline a guy's fifth-year option and then sign him again after that, because that's kind of like just the parting of ways. It's natural. Hey, we'll get one more year out of you, and hopefully you play well for both sides and then get on with your career somewhere else. But in this case, it hasn't happened for either one yet. So, yeah, every day that goes by, I think it's more likely that he'll land back here. But I'm sure he wants to do so at a price that is what he thinks he's worth.
One last thing for you, Brian. We're talking with Brian Batko from the Post Gazette. Staying along those lines of the secondary, Cam Sutton, Levi Wallace, Akello Witherspoon, the main trio at the corner position. I was reading your chat on the Post Gazette's website today, and you said that you think that's a pretty good group. Why do you think that trio is good? I have some questions about it, mainly involving Witherspoon. It was a small sample size, and he played well in a small sample size. I don't know that Sutton's ready to be, a lockdown number one guy. I don't know that any of those three are ready to be number one corners, especially going up against the receivers that the Steelers are going to face in the AFC North next year.
I'm more bullish on that group than others. Like, I know my beat partner, Ray Fittipaldo, keeps kind of pounding the table for maybe drafting a corner in round one to get a true number one corner. But I think when you turn all three of those guys loose in training camp and in the preseason, that one of them will rise to the top, and hopefully for the Steelers' sake, ideally more than one. And you have some clarity there with, okay, these are definitely our two best guys, and if Sutton's one of them, then he'll bump inside in nickel, and the other guy will come in to play whatever, half the snaps at outside corner. So maybe you don't have to be sold on Akello Witherspoon, but I thought Cam Sutton was pretty solid last year in his first time playing outside corner almost exclusively. I like the Levi Wallace signing. I feel like Bills fans and reporters up there in Buffalo were surprised that they let him get away. So, I just think maybe this idea of a number one corner is a little bit overrated. How many teams really have that guy, unless you're talking about Jalen Ramsey or J.C. Jackson? Even somebody like Stephon Gilmore has kind of fallen off as he's gotten older. So, I guess I'm just not as into this idea of you need what Joe Hayden was for you
right.
so long. I mean, those guys just don't grow on trees. It's a really difficult position to scout and evaluate and develop. And I think they've at least covered their bases here by getting in three guys that you feel are starter caliber. And again, in a perfect world, at least one of them will kind of show you that, okay, we're never going to take him off the field. He can guard the other team's best guy, or we'll just kind of, play it by you stick to your side of the field the way they did with Hayden and everybody who's been opposite him before this.
Brian, great stuff as always. Certainly always appreciate you hopping on, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Yep, my pleasure. See you guys.